What does a bad guy even look like these days?
Your guess is as good as mine. I mean, there's the obvious, right? But I mean, you've got the gangsters all the way up to the white-collar criminal fraud people. I remember I was on one job for a pretty big place, really good security. It was at the end of the week, and we were trying to get past some of their physical defenses, right? First night we went out and we tried to scale the fence. There's an element that we call red teaming. Essentially what that is we act like bad guys. So we try to break into everything that we possibly can. If I can give somebody some confidence, I find that generally that just kind of creates a better feeling or more of a feeling of ease and confidence.
Welcome back to Hey Charles. Today I am excited to introduce my very special guest, owner of Virtu Security, a private security consultant, Danny Champness, and we're going to be talking about how you can protect your home, how you can protect your business, and most importantly, later on in the show, giving you some insight how people can avoid really bad situations and not get hurt. This is the guy that you want to listen to. He has a spectacular resume with all this experience, and this is the guy that you want to hire when you've got a problem and you need someone on your side. Welcome to the show, Danny.
Thanks, Charles. Appreciate you having me on.
No, absolutely. I'm really glad that you were able to come on today and give us some insight of what's going on. And maybe we could just start by sharing with the audience a little bit about your background and your qualifications.
Absolutely.
And then we can talk about how you got started and what you do.
Okay. Yep. So about my background, 18 years-ish in law enforcement. About 13 of those years have been on the tactical side of the house, so on the SWAT team primarily. That and doing training for our department as well as other agencies across the United States. So that's kind of my background, what I'm passionate, what I enjoy doing. So that's kind of how I got started in this.
So what motivated you to get into law enforcement to begin with? There's got to be a story there.
Yeah, there's a story there. So I was getting my Bachelor of Arts in philosophy of all things. So I kind of law enforcement is 180 out from that, right?
Yeah.
So graduated, got married, and I was actually in construction. I didn't know what cops did. I thought maybe they just wrote tickets. That's about it. I was framing houses in a city up north, and I saw a police chase. They were chasing a guy. I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. They came in the neighborhood. I thought, oh, heck, I want to do something to help these guys out. All I had was a hammer in my hand. Like, what was I going to do, chuck it at the guy running? So they took off in a foot pursuit, never saw him again. But I never really watched cops a whole lot. I didn't know that they did that. I thought, man, that looks like fun. So it turns out the city where I'm at currently was hiring at the time. And so I said, I'll just give it a shot. So kind of a random story to get into law enforcement. But yeah, that's how I ended up here.
Well, yeah, but think about this. You said you're on the SWAT team and you trained, SWAT officers. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, that's not just everybody, right? Everybody doesn't come in and they get automatically put on the SWAT team. So there had to be a process for all of that. So how did you get through the ranks and what led you to that?
My first initial years were just a regular patrol cop, pushing a black and white on a midnight shift. I had a ton of fun doing that and saw all the different specialties that were open in our department. And most of the guys that I looked up to at our department at the time were on the SWAT team. And so I thought, man, these guys are great. They were really open. They were always willing to kind of share everything that their training, their knowledge with me, a brand new rookie cop. And really, it was the men on the team that kind of got me involved in that, and then that opened the door to tried out, and been loving it ever since.
Wow, and yeah. I mean, 18 years, man. That's a lot of experience. And then, from what I understand in our conversation before, you also mentioned that you do once a year go and train with special forces to just make sure that you're staying on top of your game.
Yeah, so thankfully, throughout the years, I've made some connections in the tactical community, both law enforcement and military. And those guys are always more than willing to open their doors and share things that they've learned from operations, their training experience to kind of help enrich our town through investing in our department. And so it's been a great opportunity to train with those guys.
So I bet you get to see different aspects, different agencies, different scenarios. And I'm sure that, maybe certain agencies, maybe specialize in one aspect or another, in the whole aspect of security. So it's good that you do that. So yeah, I'm just very honored that you're on the show today to really kind of talk with me about some of these things. But There's also some interesting things that you've done as a contractor as well, right? That
Yep.
have given you even more experience to help your clients. And I wonder if you can kind of go into that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So probably about 8 years ago, I started as a 1099 with another national company doing a lot of personal defense training, a lot of tactical training for law enforcement teams. And then that kind of got me into the corporate security world as well. So training private security contractors for these big corporations. And then that kind of paved the way to get into some security penetration type testing for some of these bigger companies across the United States, which is probably the most fun that I have actually.
That does sound kind of fun because it
Yeah.
sounds like you actually get to play on the other side,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
be the bad guy per se, and
Yep.
try to get in there and find out what some of these vulnerabilities are. So kind of tell us a little bit about what that's like and what is the point of the mission per se
Yeah.
on a lot of these vulnerability checks.
Yeah. So on vulnerability assessment, like a full vulnerability assessment, there's an element that we call red teaming. And essentially, what that is we act like bad guys. So we try to break into everything that we possibly can, which is a great kind of turn of events, right? After being a cop for 18 years, getting to play the burglar
Yeah.
is a lot of fun. Using a lot of the exploits that I've seen in my career to try and do the same things to these companies. And so, what that usually consists of is kind of a period of surveillance. We watch the target, we kind of learn their patterns of life and kind of how they operate, and then we look for exploits that we think we could get in. And usually, the attacks are kind of geared towards what the client is asking for. They may identify a vulnerability and they want to say, hey, we think we've shored this up, but we need an outside look at it. And so, we'll take their recommendations and what we see, and towards the end of the week, we'll usually start to attack. And a lot of those generally we start soft with some social engineering attacks to see how they adhere to their policies, right? So visitor policies, escort policies, and that kind of thing. We see how far we can get with that. And then towards the very end of the week, we start doing some harder attacks where we're actually breaking into facilities after hours, which is always interesting and can be fun. We've gotten close to being caught several times, but never got caught yet. So,
Wow, that's
yeah.
amazing. So there's something you just said about social engineering
Mhm.
attacks.
Yeah.
That's kind of interesting that you bring that up.
Yeah.
So the way I kind of understood it, maybe you can kind of explain a little bit more and elaborate on it, is that, I mean, those are like, trying to talk your way past like people that are supposed to essentially like put a protocol in place not to
Right.
let someone in. Am I kind of hitting on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's really a deception attack, right? Is what it is, and we want to do it ethically as red teamers. But really, what it is, it's trying to exploit things that are common. People have baselines. They recognize the world around them. Usually, generally, what happens is they know there's a problem when there's a significant anomaly in that baseline. And so you can take a social engineering attack and kind of work within those baselines so that nobody suspects anything, right? So common thing might be if you got a big facility where you have contractors coming and going, carrying a clipboard, throwing on a hard hat, and forging an ID card, saying that you got an appointment, something is usually pretty easy to get past people because they have the assumption that, oh, that's just how things work. This guy must be here. I'm going to stay in my lane and not challenge this because this might be the boss's idea and I don't want to stick my head up. So, and usually there's policies in place, but those are just the kind of the low hanging fruit that can be easy to get past.
That's kind of interesting because you say low hanging fruit. So, I mean, that probably applies not to just big corporations and them trying to, shore up their security, but I think that probably applies on a personal level as well.
Absolutely. I mean, that's a kind of a common criminal scam, right? So I identify some sort of weakness and some vulnerability, create some sort of forced teaming where make you feel like you owe me something or you're helping me out even, right? And so I kind of slip past your guard because I don't look like a bad guy.
Right.
Hmm.
And I guess the question is, I mean, being in law enforcement for so long with all that history, what does a bad guy even look like these days?
Your guess is as good as mine. I mean, there's the obvious, right? But
Right.
I mean, you've got the gangsters all the way up to the white collar criminal fraud people. So I mean, it's varied, and there's really no one look for a criminal.
Right. So, I mean, that's a really good point because, I think what people see and their perception, it might be relatively easy to be deceived,
Yeah.
is what you're saying. So that being said, you have all this experience. Sounds like you got to have a whole bunch of fun as a contractor.
hmm
So now you're a private security consultant. You have your own company.
hmm
There's got to be a reason for that. What was the motivation in going out and wanting to do this?
Primarily, it was just thinking back on all of the opportunities that I had. So I had people that were more experienced than me, people that had answers to questions I was asking about, tactics or some sort of problem in law enforcement. They've already experienced it, and they were open and willing to pour into me and kind of share that with me to help me grow. And then thinking back, I've just realized, man, I've had a lot of opportunity, more than most, to kind of develop those skills. And so I really kind of post lockdown saw kind of the distrust that was going on kind of in across the nation, right? People were concerned about things. And so I thought, man, I would really want to do all that I can to help make my community safer in the areas that I've got to experience, right? So taking all of that and distilling it, kind of rounding that learning curve and passing it on to other people that were asking the same questions that I was asking earlier on in my career.
Well, that's great. And I think you said, that there is a higher level of distrust ever since lockdown. And it seems like these last few years, you hear a lot of crazy stuff that's going on.
Mhm.
And I think that people in general have, a little bit more awareness that, things are not just necessarily, going. And I'm not saying that there hasn't been times that, there hasn't been discord, but maybe you can kind of dig in a little bit more. I mean, just being on the ground and seeing what you've been seeing. I mean, what's going on?
I mean, it's communities different. Crime statistics across the nation are doing different things. Violent crime might be down in one area and up in another, right? Or property crime might be down in one area and up in another. So, but despite what the statistics are telling people, I think generally there's just kind of a feeling of unease. Can't put my finger on it directly at what the cause of that is, but that's something a lot of times people get concerned because it feels like it's out of their control, right? They don't know what to do about it. And that's kind of why I'm doing what I'm doing currently, is because if I can give somebody some confidence, a business owner, that his assets are going to be as protected as they can be, and give him the tools to protect them, or somebody that the skills to in a self-defense type situation to have some confidence to take care of themselves and not rely on others. I find that generally that creates a better feeling, or more of a feeling of ease and confidence, and kind of the way that things are right now.
Yeah, especially since, everybody, every time you turn something on, something's going on, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of crazy.
Yeah.
But one of the things that you kind of touched on is, this feeling of uneasiness. But one of the things I think you shared with me in the past is that the best way to protect yourself is to be more aware, right?
Correct. Yep.
And to avoid a situation.
Absolutely. Yeah. Awareness is really the foundational skill, what we call situational awareness. And that's not just being aware of your surroundings, right, which is a good idea always, but even just aware of your own vulnerabilities, whether it's in your home or kind of your patterns of life, where you drive, the different habits that you have, or your business, right? And those are easy ways to mitigate vulnerability, by just being aware of, hey, where do I expect a threat to come from? And that way I can kind of give my attention to that, because we only have so much bandwidth, right? And so if I can prioritize that and put it on the places where statistically there's a threat that's probably going to be there, I kind of rest easier at night.
In going in that, I think maybe people in general like the idea of that it's not overly complicated, because what you're describing right there is relatively simple in my mind.
Very simple. Yeah, very simple. In fact, it's the simple things we overlook. I was telling you about some of the penetration tests that we do. Remember, I was on one job for a pretty big place, really good security. It was at the end of the week, and we were trying to get past some of their physical defenses. Right, first night we went out and we tried to scale the fence, and it just wasn't working out for us because they had good perimeter security. Well, the next day we went out and we just walked the entire perimeter of it, looking like a couple of construction guys, and we found a gigantic hole in the fence, right? And that was all it took. It was just a hole right behind a tree. Very simple fix, but the rest of the perimeter, it was doing what it needed to do. It was keeping us out, or at least it was causing some difficulty for us, right? But it's a simple, simple thing like that where we can be aware of these small little vulnerabilities and take care of those small ones that's going to make us stronger overall.
Well, and I think that just on the personal level, and when we kind of tie it back to that on the aspect of just being more aware, I think we just probably have gone, day to day. We're just minding our own business. We're just like, not paying attention to things. But I think what you're saying now is that we are going to have to start paying attention to things if we want to take more action and keeping ourselves safe or a loved one safe or just being more in line with that philosophy.
Yeah, it's just being vigilant. There's a line to walk there, right? You could be over vigilant to where you're no fun to be around because your eyes are constantly shifting, and you're avoiding every single social scenario that you can think of because you don't want to expose your flanks. But the other side of that is so many people are just walking around with their nose in a smartphone, in transition spaces, parking lots, going from car to store, those types of things. So just being your head up and aware of what's happening in the world. That way you can always put yourself in the position before the actual event happens, and avoid it altogether.
No, that's interesting that you say that. And I think it goes back to what we talked about before about that situational awareness. And, you're talking about things like, just even being at the grocery store. I mean, a lot of these things, when you say events happen, it may just be like everyday life stuff. Right?
Yeah,
This isn't necessarily like a specific thing, but it might just be your day-to-day business and something could happen.
absolutely. Or you can get caught up in something, right? So you walk into a robbery and not even aware of it, right? So, or I mean, and don't even think necessarily adversarial events, but maybe paying attention to your surrounding is going to keep you from stepping into the crosswalk in a parking lot because you saw that car that was accelerating too quickly in the park. Those types of things, little things like that.
Right. Right. So I think the big question, I think a lot of people is, also like protecting my home, protecting my family. I mean, that is something that you do. So you work with corporations, you
Mhm.
work with, medium and small businesses, but you also can help people out with their home situation as well, correct?
Yep, absolutely. So self-defense training, not necessarily on the kinetic side, but also just understanding where the strengths and weaknesses are in your home security design, right? Understanding certain patterns of life in your neighborhood. Even when crime's up, are you keeping your car unlocked in front of your house, or what's that situation like? Are you keeping your doors locked? Do you have good lighting around your house? Do you proper plants around certain windows that just make it difficult? And honestly, a lot of this, especially on the home defense side, is just making your house not worth it, right? You're always going to have vulnerabilities. Always. You can't get rid of them all. But if you just make it not worth it, usually crooks, in my experience, are pretty lazy. They're looking for the easy target. And so if you just make it, man, that's just too much hassle. It's too much work to get in there. I'm moving on.
Right.
Mhm.
So kind of describe maybe some simple things that you can do. Like you mentioned lighting,
Lighting is right. So crooks are cockroaches, right? They don't like to be in the light.
right?
Lighting in areas that where you access your home, around your front door. Where you park. If you park in your driveway or your side drive or whatever it may be, making sure that that's well lit. Forcing your locks in your house, right? Replacing the little 1/4 inch screws in your strike plates with 3-inch screws that drill all the way into the king stud. Things like that make it difficult to access your home to people that you don't want to be in there.
Well, and what you're talking about is some of the basic stuff. I
Mhm.
mean, you could probably, I think what you're identifying is there are things that you can do that may not, be extremely expensive. And then if you really want to kind of go all in, I'm sure that there's a lot of stuff like that
Yeah.
that you could recommend as well, right?
Yeah, we can definitely escalate to technology, to tactics, all kinds of different things. But really, it's the simple things that if you pay attention to are probably going to pay the biggest dividends in the long run.
No, absolutely. But I would like maybe a little bit of a taste for the audience on some of the things that if people are willing to invest
Mhm.
in their security, especially in this day and age,
Yeah.
what does that look like? I mean, what when you're talking about technology, I mean, what's kind of the latest and greatest in
Yeah.
protecting your home or just protecting your assets? I mean, what does that look like? Because and also maybe, talking about it from a cyber point of view as well, right?
Yeah, so, cyber, I know next to nothing
Okay.
about about cyber, so I wouldn't be the guy, but I do know guys that are, that's kind of their home and, would be happy to refer somebody. But as far as design basics for the home or next level is really just strengthening your perimeter. Security design is extremely important, right? And how you structure that. And it always starts off with the perimeter, right? And anytime you're thinking about security design, you want to start to layer. And then we add technology on top of that. So, you're talking about, I mean, for businesses, they've got electric fences that are great at deterring people. You've got, high fences, 8 to 10 foot fences that make it, or anti-scale fences that are difficult to get over. Again, just make it not worth it, right?
Right.
And then lighting, cameras. Now, the thing about cameras you have to understand is they're almost a post-incident asset, right? So we use them, at least in the law enforcement side, we use them so that we capture the evidence of the crime. Not always the strongest deterrent, which really was when we're talking about being in front of the event. That's what we're after. Now, they can be if they're positioned in the right place. A lot of cameras have, most cameras, in fact, now, and you can view them live. You can talk through them, and those are a great deterrent, right? If somebody's in an area around your house you don't like, they pop up. You can tell them, "Hey, get out of here before I call the cops." So that kind of thing. There's some stuff that we could do to strengthen the doors, reinforce doors, kind of look at channelized spaces in your house to where people have to come through if they want to fight you. There's quite a bit that you can do on top of kind of the basics.
I know it's kind of crazy to talk about, and maybe one would always hope that this isn't where we would be,
Yeah.
but in this day and age. But I think you said it best, is that there is this heightened sense of just kind of something in the air per se
Yeah.
that's causing people to be more focused on this, because we are hearing about things that are happening.
Hmm.
Whether it's crime or you hear some story. There was somebody that got, carjacked, and this woman had to jump out of the car,
Yeah.
to get away. And, there's real things that are going on right now. People are kind of, worrying about it. So I think it's good that people can have resources,
Absolutely.
to be able to deal with this. But I mean,
Absolutely.
what do you think, just right now is kind of, a common thing that you're seeing? And I know that's a very broad question, but is it more theft and burglary, or are people getting attacked more, or what is that?
Yeah, I think property crimes, especially in California, are kind of the thing that's on the rise right now. And so we're talking about vehicle burglaries, home burglaries, theft from a person, that kind of thing, or even just being in the middle of where, a theft can turn into a robbery, right? So somebody tries to take something and the person goes to stop them, and then violence ensues. We're seeing quite a bit of that, and I don't always know the driving factor behind it, but
Sure.
it certainly is on the rise. And so, again, that really comes down to the awareness piece. Kind of aware of your surroundings when somebody's approaching you. How do we discern somebody's intentions based off of their body language, for instance, right? Or what things can we say or do, or how can we posture to kind of draw that line in the sand so that we know that, okay, I understand this person's intentions, because now they're continuing after I've given them a strong signal to stop, right? And that really comes down just to the awareness piece.
Right. So in that case, you're almost kind of saying that in a lot of these cases, maybe not 100% of the time, but a good majority of them, people are telegraphing their move, in a sense.
Almost always. Almost always. Yeah. So, and that's one of the benefits that I've had from being a police officer, is just kind of understanding people's body language. I mean, they're telling you what they're going to do, right? And just learning how to read that they're making their intentions known to you. The term heuristics, right? So kind of that gut feeling that
Yes.
people have almost all the time. It's correct. Why? Because they've either experienced it or they've heard a story. So they're living vicariously through somebody else's experience. And now their gut, their sixth sense, their intuition, whatever you want to call it, is telling them, hey, that's not right. But the problem is, a lot of times in an overly polite society, we we don't pay attention to that, right? But we don't necessarily have the skills to deal with that. So we're feeling that. Now what do? I don't want to seem rude. How can I do something that makes my intentions known? What I don't want you to continue doing, and if they cross that line, what do I do from there? That's usually that gray area. That decision point is always kind of has been one of the failures, I think, commonly in these types of violent encounters.
Because somebody had some level of intuition,
Yeah.
or there was something that didn't look right.
Right.
And then instead of following their gut, basically they just continued down that path, in a sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, a common thing, interviews with victims is, I knew something wasn't right. I just knew something wasn't right. But either they didn't know what to do at that point, or they didn't want to appear rude, right, or embarrassed after the fact, and so things start to unfold poorly from there.
That's kind of crazy that you
Mhm.
said they didn't want to, appear rude, and
Yeah.
maybe that's just inherently in human nature. Like that's just kind of maybe
Yeah.
something that's internal that is like, okay, well, maybe I'm going to be a little bit, offensive, or I'm gonna be rude to somebody. You,
Yeah.
you you said that a couple of times. It's interesting that you brought that up. So that must be a common reason why people say, oh, well, you asked him, well, if you felt like there was something off, why did you continue?
Yeah, and a lot of times is like, well, I didn't wanna make a bad assumption about somebody, right? I didn't wanna assume something about somebody's motivations. It's a sad story when you're interviewing these people because they knew. They knew that, hey, this something's just not right, but they just maybe didn't have the skills, or maybe felt that they didn't have the permission, or that it was okay to tell somebody, "No, you can't do that," or "You need to leave," or "You need to stop."
So in that situation, usually, I mean, again, I'm not trying to ask you to pinpoint one, but what would be a good observation maybe to tell somebody if somebody was, your client and you were telling them, hey, if you come into a situation where something seems off, what is the safe thing to do? I mean, obviously not turning around and running away and making a big scene, right? But
Yeah, well, finding an exit, right?
okay.
Finding an exit. So give yourself the room. And again, that comes to the awareness piece. Like, what does your terrain look like? Am I boxed in, or have I left myself an out? To always kind of leave yourself an out to leave in case something bad happens, because it's just better to not be there, right? I mean, even to deal, even if you're victorious in that conflict, to deal with all the after effects can be kind of messy, right? It can be life changing, and so just learning how to give yourself a gracious exit, have that line in the sand, and it's better to be embarrassed than it is to be hurt. And quite frankly, it's probably the most loving thing you can do for yourself is not allow yourself to get hurt, and the most loving thing you could do for another person is not allow them to do something that's going to be harmful to you or themselves in the long run.
Right. And I think that's really one of the hardest things that,
Mhm.
everybody's having to deal with. And I got to imagine, I mean, as a parent, I mean, you've got kids, that are going out there, having to make, decisions. So I got to imagine that situational awareness, I mean, it's not just about just the parents, but it's also about understanding how to instill that in your kids as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. And like I tell my kids too, I use the analogy, like growing up, it was always, yeah, hey, how do I get out of this headlock, right? And you learn how to get out of headlock by saying, okay, here, let me get you in a headlock, and I'm going to show you how to get out of it. But we never asked the question like, how did I get in that headlock in the first place? Like, I don't even want to be there. Now, if it happens, yeah, great. We need to have the skills to deal with that. But maybe I want to focus my bandwidth on just not being there in the first place. That way I've got more bandwidth, more energy to give to the things that I love, rather than trying to deal with some situation that I'm afraid of. Does that make sense?
No, that absolutely does. And I think, all in all, what I'm hearing you say is the best defense, right? Or well, actually, maybe rephrase that and say that right. Maybe the best offense, per
Yeah.
se, is to have a really good defense and not put yourself in that situation.
Yeah.
And it sounds like that not only can you train people to be more aware, but if they need some additional training on how to defend themselves, if they do get themselves in that situation, you can help with that as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's what I enjoy doing the most.
Right. That's great. So here we have it, right? We have everything from, helping out with corporate security, business security, personal security. So Danny, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Absolutely.
And where do people find you if they want to reach out and see if they might be interested in using your services?
Yeah, absolutely. It's www.virtusdc.com. virtusdc.com.
That's great. Well, Danny, thanks again. And thank you for joining us on the show today. It has been an absolute pleasure interviewing Danny from Virtus Security. And if you're interested in learning more, go ahead and visit his website. But if you're interested in learning more about what we're doing here on the show at Hey Charles, you could share this episode if you find it helpful. You can find us on YouTube at Hey Charles Biz and Instagram and TikTok at Hey Charles 77. See you next time.